March 1944. 6 miles above Germany, the sky is a violent gray battlefield. Inside a B-17 bomber, engines tremble under flak bursts that bloom like black scars around the formation. Frost creeps along the glass. Oxygen masks rasp with every strained breath. The target ahead is Berlin, the heart of Hitler's Reich, a destination that has already claimed too many American crews. For months, bomber pilots have learned a harsh truth. The deeper they fly into Germany, the more likely they are to die there. Radio calls crackle through the intercom. Bandits. 11 o'clock. Closing fast. Dozens of German fighters, Bf-109s and FW-190s, rise like predatory shadows. They have been waiting. They always waited. But this time, something is different. A whistle cuts through the air. A formation of sleek silver fighters dives from the sun. Their wings are long and sharp. Their speed, unrelenting. Their presence, unbelievable. Mustangs. They are still here over Berlin. A single thought spreads through every bomber crewman, like oxygen regaining a failing lung. We might actually make it home. And that realization leads us into the question of how this miracle became possible. Long before the P-51 rose above Berlin, the skies over Europe were an open wound. When the United States entered World War II in December 1941, it brought a new philosophy into the struggle against Germany: daylight precision bombing. Unlike the British, who struck cities under the cover of darkness, the U.S. 8th Air Force believed its advanced Norden bombsight could cripple the Reich with surgical strikes, oil refineries, aircraft plants, ball-bearing factories, submarine pens. Destroy industry, break the war machine, and force surrender without invading every field of Europe. But ideals meet reality in the air. In 1942 and early 1943, American bombers began pushing deeper into occupied Europe: Lille, Lorient, Schweinfurt, Regensburg. As soon as they crossed into hostile airspace, the German response was swift and deadly. The Luftwaffe's Jagdwaffe fighter arm had home field advantage. Radar stations tracked incoming raids. Controllers sent Bf-109s and FW-190s into the bomber's path with precision timing. These German pilots were veterans of years of combat: Spain, Poland, France, Russia. They knew how to kill, and they understood one critical weakness in the American plan. Bomber formations could defend themselves, but only to a point. Gunners sat behind .50 caliber machine guns, top turret, ball turret, waist windows, nose and tail, creating a fortress of firepower. But that fortress moved at only 250 miles per hour and could not dodge attacks. A well-coordinated German fighter group could tear into the formation, peel off stragglers, and destroy them one by one. Early escorts like the P-47 Thunderbolt and P-38 Lightning protected the bombers across the Channel and through the first stretch of France. But at the edge of their range, the fighters always had to turn back. The bombers kept flying. Alone. Deep in the heart of enemy air territory, the Luftwaffe waited, fueled, rested, and ready. Losses climbed at a pace that shocked American commanders. Missions like Schweinfurt-Regensburg in August 1943 became symbols of sacrifice. 60 out of 376 bombers were lost in a single day, hundreds of crewmen gone without a trace into the burning fields and towns below. Newspaper headlines celebrated bravery. Commanders promised results. But crews felt the truth. Without escorts all the way to the target and back, precision bombing was a death sentence. As autumn 1943 arrived, strategic bombing teetered on failure. Factories remained operational. Fighter production increased. German morale hardened. American airmen began to dread every dawn. The elegant theory of daylight bombing was now weighed against the brutal mathematics of survival. Crews counted missions like lottery numbers: reach 25 and you go home. Most never made it past 10. Pilots scanned the horizon for friendly fighters that would never appear again. And every formation that limped home, filled with empty seats where friends once sat, brought the same question back to Allied commanders. How do we protect the bombers deep inside Germany? The answer required more than courage. It required a revolution in aviation. A fighter that did not yet exist in the skies where it was most needed. A fighter with the range to cross the continent. The speed to take on the Luftwaffe. the firepower to fight and keep fighting all the way home. Whispers of such an aircraft were beginning to circulate, but few believed salvation was coming. Yet far from Berlin, engineers were solving a puzzle that would soon change everything. The solution emerged from an unexpected direction. In 1940, the Royal Air Force approached a small American company, North American Aviation, with a request to build P-40 Warhawks for Britain. Instead of simply copying an older design, North American's engineers proposed something radical. A new fighter, built fast. They called it the NA-73, soon renamed the Mustang. Early Mustangs used an Allison V1710 engine. At low altitude, the aircraft was excellent. Fast, maneuverable, beautifully streamlined. But above 15,000 feet, where bomber battles raged over Europe, the Allison engine suffocated. Speed and power dropped dramatically. Britain appreciated the Mustang, but the RAF needed a high-altitude killer. Then came the idea that transformed history. Engineers fitted the Mustang with the Rolls-Royce Merlin, the same power plant that gave the Spitfire its legendary performance. Packard in the United States soon manufactured Merlin engines under license. The result was astonishing. At high altitude, the newly designated P-51 gained speed, climb rate, and range beyond anything the Allies had fielded. Its thin laminar flow wing reduced drag. Its internal fuel capacity was generous. And when equipped with drop tanks, the Mustang could fly where no Allied fighter had gone before. Deep into Germany, escort the bombers all the way to target, engage the enemy and still return. In late 1943, small groups of Mustangs entered combat with the 8th Air Force. Bomber crews noticed them instantly. Sleek, confident, flying like predators rather than protectors. Yet the strategic situation remained grim. Germany was mass-producing fighters at a rising pace. Experienced Luftwaffe leaders like Adolf Galland believed the new Allied escort fighters were no real danger deep in Reich airspace. Intelligence officers assessed that the Americans could never sustain long-range protection across the continent. They soon learned otherwise. United States commanders made a pivotal decision. No longer would escorts simply fly beside bombers. Now, fighters would seek out and destroy German interceptors wherever they launched, including above their own airfields. At the same time, American industry unleashed a manufacturing surge. P-51 production accelerated. Replacement pilots and ground crews flooded into England. Training shifted from cautious protection to aggressive air superiority tactics. By January 1944, the stage was set for a dramatic shift in the air war. Bomber Command demanded one mission above all. Berlin, the political capital, the psychological fortress, the heart of the Reich. German leaders believed their air defenses around the city were impenetrable. Flying fortresses that attempted to reach the capital had been torn apart long before its skyline appeared below. But the Mustang changed the equation. Again and again, P-51s extended farther into Germany, Leipzig, Brunswick, Frankfurt, proving that long-range escort was no longer a dream but a growing reality. Bomber crews began to hope, subtly, privately, that maybe this aircraft could carry them through the most dangerous skies on Earth. Still, disbelief lingered. The Luftwaffe had dominated Europe's airspace for years. It was an empire of experience, innovation, and fierce national pride. But as winter turned to spring, a date approached that would shock German intelligence and reshape the war above Europe. March 1944, the first fully escorted bombing raid to Berlin. The Americans were coming. And this time, they would not be alone. The sky itself was about to gain new rules. Inside every bomber that crossed into Germany, the unspoken question was simple. Will I see home again? Nothing in a soldier's training prepared them for the brutality of high-altitude warfare. At 25,000 feet, temperatures plunged to -40 degrees Celsius. A single hole in a glove could freeze a finger numb within minutes. A small fracture to an oxygen line could lead to blackouts and death without a single bullet fired. Crews formed tight bonds because their survival depended on it. Their lives were connected by cables, guns, and trust. Each man had a role, and a moment of hesitation could doom the entire aircraft. The Luftwaffe pilots, too, felt the weight of every engagement. Many were veterans from earlier campaigns, confident, experienced, and brutally efficient. But by 1944 they watched new threats closing in from every direction. Soviet forces pressing eastward, Allied invasions looming in Italy, American bombers rising in number and reach. For both sides, the air war felt like a race against fate. Bomber crews began to memorize the silhouette of the Mustang, those sharp wings, the confident dive, because it meant life. They watched for that silver flash not just for protection, but for hope. For the first time, survival felt possible. Early escort doctrine required fighters to cling to bomber formations, defensive shadows with strict limits. It was a flawed strategy. German pilots struck from above or behind, then zoomed away before escort fighters could react. By the time the Mustangs reached the scene, the damage was already done. January 1944 brought a defining change in orders, championed by commanders like Jimmy Doolittle, new leader of the 8th Air Force. His directive was clear, shocking, and aggressive. Go hunt them. Leave the bombers. Find the Luftwaffe and destroy it. Escorts were suddenly predators, not protectors. P-51 squadrons began flying far ahead of the bombers, sweeping the skies clean. They attacked German assembly points. They strafed airfields during takeoffs and landings. They drove pilots into the ground decisively. This shift forced the Luftwaffe into desperation. German fighters could no longer mass in overwhelming numbers. The hunters were being hunted. Control of the skies started to slip, quietly at first, then dramatically. Bomber survivability improved. Losses dropped. Confidence surged in American ranks. A fight for dominance was now a fight for daylight itself. Whoever controlled the air would soon control the war below. The P-51 was not just an improvement, it was a leap. Key advantages reshaped aerial warfare. Keycap 1 range. Internal fuel plus external drop tanks gave the Mustang over 1,600 miles of reach, enough to escort bombers to Berlin and beyond. Keycap 2 speed and altitude. Powered by the Packard-built Merlin engine, the P-51 could climb and fight above 30,000 feet, where Bf-109 struggled to maintain peak performance. Keycap 3 maneuverability and firepower. 6.50 caliber Browning guns mounted in the wings delivered devastating bursts, long, accurate, and lethal to any German fighter caught in the open. Keycap 4 aerodynamics. The laminar flow wing reduced drag at high speed, allowing the Mustang to dive, chase, and escape with unmatched efficiency. Even the pilots noted how the aircraft felt different, nimble in combat, stable in formation, built for superiority rather than survival. The Mustang didn't merely escort bombers. It challenged the Luftwaffe in the very space they once ruled, and won. As these angles converged, fear transformed into resolve, tactics evolved into dominance, and engineering powered a revolution. The German Air Command began to sense a new danger forming over their homeland. And that leads us directly into the next set of angles, where the enemy's perspective and psychological shock come sharply into view. For years, German leadership believed they understood American limits. They measured fuel capacity, estimated engine performance, and calculated that no Allied fighter could reach central Germany and survive the return journey. Luftwaffe intelligence reports confidently stated, "Once the escorts leave, the bombers will be destroyed." It was a formula that had never failed. But in early 1944, reports began reaching Berlin that American fighters were appearing deeper into the Reich, Stuttgart, Hanover, Brunswick. First sporadically, then consistently. German commanders dismissed early sightings as mistakes, impossible, hallucinations in a stressful sky. Then came the undeniable truth. New Allied fighters were escorting bombers nearly to Berlin. Adolf Galland, chief of Luftwaffe fighters, realized the implications immediately. If escort fighters could defend bombers every minute of their mission, then the Luftwaffe could no longer destroy the bombers faster than America could replace them. The industrial equation, the one Germany hoped to exploit, had just reversed. Shock became dread as reconnaissance confirmed the name of the intruder. Mustang. P-51. Long range. Fast. Deadly. German morale cracked hardest not when bombers arrived, but when fighters no longer turned back. It meant the Americans had solved the greatest barrier of air warfare, distance. and they had done so with a fighter superior to almost anything Germany could field in response. Even before the Mustang's arrival, Germany faced a slow crisis. Hitler's wars on the eastern and western fronts drained Luftwaffe resources. Fuel shortages grew severe, and experienced pilots were lost faster than they could be trained. A Bf-109 ace who survived years of combat might be replaced by a teenager with only a few hours in the air. Every Mustang that shot down a veteran removed a valuable instructor, a multiplier of experience. Every successful escort mission meant Allied bombs destroyed more fuel refineries, worsening shortages for the next day. A catastrophic feedback loop was forming. Less fuel, less training, more losses, even less fuel. German ground crews cannibalized aircraft for parts. Squadrons arrived with fewer fighters each week. Maintenance errors skyrocketed. Morale declined. The Luftwaffe was being stretched like a rubber band nearing its breaking point. And then the Americans pulled harder. Air warfare is never just metal and fuel, it is belief. For the first years of the war, Germans believed the Reich was protected by an impenetrable shield of skilled pilots and fast interceptors. The Mustang punctured that shield. The sudden appearance of American fighters near Berlin created a haunting realization among Luftwaffe pilots. If they are here, we are no longer safe anywhere. German civilians heard the same message each time they looked up. The war that once seemed distant was now directly overhead. Bomber crews, once resigned to dying over Germany, began to feel invincible with P-51s by their side. Confidence changed behavior, they held formation better, fired more accurately, believed in survival. The Mustang didn't just protect lives. It restored hope. And hope is a weapon. Now, all these forces, tactical, emotional, industrial, psychological, converged around one event. A moment that would prove whether the Mustang was truly the master of European skies. The Americans would challenge Berlin itself. Which takes us to the decisive confrontation at the heart of this story. Berlin. The name alone carried the weight of an empire. For a year, the 8th Air Force had attempted to strike the German capital. Each attempt ended in catastrophe. Heavy bombers shredded before they ever reached the city's defenses. Berlin was a fortress in the sky, surrounded by radar posts, flak towers, and Luftwaffe squadrons ready to intercept the moment Allied escorts turned for home. In early 1944, American commanders issued a challenge that seemed almost reckless. Berlin must be bombed in daylight with full escort all the way. The date was set, March 4, 1944. That morning, over 600 bombers and their escorts began assembling over the English countryside. Engines rumbled across the sky in one continuous roar, a thunderous procession of American air power rising to cross the North Sea. Among those escorting the bombers were the 4th and 357th Fighter Groups, flying P-51B Mustangs, still new, still unproven at this extreme range. As they crossed the German frontier, resistance built quickly. German radar detected the incoming waves. Luftwaffe pilots scrambled. Dozens of fighters launched into the cold morning air. A battle of speed and nerves unfolded as American bombers pressed deeper into Germany than ever before. Toward a target so politically and symbolically vital that Hitler himself monitored reports in real time. Some bomber groups aborted in worsening weather, but others pressed forward. And then, for the first time, Berlin appeared beneath them. Factories, rail yards, and communications hubs filled the Norden bomb sites. Rotating target drums clicked into place. Bomb bay doors groaned open. The city that had once represented untouchable power became a battlefield. As the first bombs fell, the Luftwaffe launched a massive counterattack. FW-190s slashed through contrails, cannons spitting fire. Bf-109s made head-on passes into the formations. Daring, deadly, and often fatal to both sides. But something was wrong in German formations. Their opponents, the escort fighters, did not turn back. P-51 Mustangs dove into the fray over Berlin itself. The dogfights were chaotic and brutal. The Mustangs attacked with confidence, chasing German fighters instead of disengaging. Some made repeated strafing runs over airfields on the outskirts of the city, the ultimate insult to a Luftwaffe that once owned the skies. Adolf Galland later called the moment a major turning point in the air war. A day when German pilots realized that the Americans would now fight them anywhere. Bombers turned toward home. The most dangerous portion of every mission had always been the exit. Damaged, low on ammo, engines failing. In the past, this was where the Luftwaffe extracted its deadliest toll. But the Mustangs stayed all the way. Even when fuel gauges neared empty, P-51 pilots squeezed every mile out of their drop tanks, refusing to abandon the bombers in the very moments they needed them most. A profound shift of emotion spread through American formations. Instead of counting losses, they were counting survivors. In the control rooms beneath Berlin, the Luftwaffe's leaders watched the battle unfold. Stunned. Their calculations had been shattered. Their air superiority was no longer a given. The Reich was vulnerable. The hunters had become the hunted. Berlin, once untouchable, was struck and escaped from in daylight. But this was only the beginning, because the Americans were not satisfied with one mission. They were preparing something far more devastating. A campaign that would tear the German Air Force apart at its roots. The first daylight strike on Berlin was a shock. What followed was a systematic dismantling of the Luftwaffe. American planners had recognized the opportunity. If the Luftwaffe could be forced into repeated, large-scale battles, if they could be drawn up day after day to defend critical industries, their remaining strength could be crushed in the open sky. This strategy was given a name, Operation Argument, more widely remembered today as Big Week, February 20th to 25th, 1944. Before Berlin was bombed in force, bomber streams had already begun pulverizing aircraft factories in Leipzig, Gotha, Regensburg, Stuttgart, anywhere the Reich produced fighters. The Mustangs were there for each mission, escorting deep into hostile territory. Every time German fighters rose to defend these factories, they lost more irreplaceable pilots. Every time they refused to rise, more factories burned. It was a trap with no escape. During these weeks, P-51 units demonstrated exactly what Jimmy Doolittle demanded: total offensive dominance. Mustangs no longer circled bombers defensively. They attacked head-on. They prowled airfields as German fighters landed low and slow, a perfect target. They pursued enemy aircraft miles from the formations. They eliminated escape. The message to the Luftwaffe was absolute. There is no safe sky left in Germany. Across communications networks, German squadron leaders reported staggering losses. Too few veterans. Too many inexperienced replacements. Too little fuel to train them. Too late to shift strategy. Even when new aircraft like the high-speed Me-262 jet showed promise, production was limited and Hitler delayed deployment by demanding it serve as a bomber. The Mustang had not merely outperformed German fighters. It had arrived when Germany could no longer afford mistakes. March 1944, the second blow to Berlin. 2 weeks after Big Week, American forces returned to Berlin with greater numbers. This time weather held. This time the escorts remained stronger than ever. The Luftwaffe threw everything it had. Bf-109s attacking from high angles. FW-190s ripping through bomber streams. Fighter bombers trying desperate head-on charges. Yet again, P-51s cut them off. German pilots who dove into American formations discovered Mustangs already behind them, guns blazing. Frantic radio calls filled cockpits. Ami fighters everywhere. We cannot break through. Where are our reinforcements? Losses grew catastrophic. Wreckage fell across forests, farmlands, and city blocks. Smoke trailed across the Reich's once clear sky. The battlefield was now above Germany, and Germany was losing. Berlin's defenses crumble. In April 1944, the Americans struck the capital repeatedly. Marienfeld, Daimler-Benz engine works. Tempelhof aircraft factories. A railway infrastructure choking transport. Each mission escorted. Each mission further proof the old rules had died. For the Luftwaffe, the war had flipped upside down. The closer they fought to home, the worse the losses. The deeper the Americans flew, the stronger they became. Veteran pilots began to speak openly of defeat. Not on the ground, not from tanks or infantry, but from the sky. Adolf Galland summed it up with bleak simplicity. We have lost the air. The shift is complete. By late spring 1944, the Luftwaffe had reached a point from which it would never recover. Fighter output still grew, but pilots to fly them were gone. Fuel reserves were collapsing. The Mustang was everywhere. America now held the dominant position it had dreamed of. Air superiority total and undeniable. Skies once owned by the Reich now belonged to the silver wings of the P-51. And with those skies clear, the next battles would shape the fate of all Europe. Because soon, bombers would not just be paving the road toward Berlin. They would be paving the road toward invasion. The consequences of this air victory were enormous, on the ground, in the war economy, and in the hearts of everyone who watched contrails stretch over Europe. Which leads us directly into what followed. The transformation in the skies over Europe was as swift as it was dramatic. For the first 2 years of the American campaign, daylight bombing had been a gamble with horrific odds. But after early 1944, everything changed. Bomber survival improves. Loss rates that once reached 20% per mission dropped to low single digits on many flights. A bomber crew's hope, once a fragile, forbidden emotion, became part of their mindset. Mechanical failures, flak, and weather were still deadly threats. But the terror of being swarmed by German fighters deep inside the Reich faded with the arrival of the Mustang. Now, when German formations rose in desperation, P-51 squadrons were waiting higher, faster, and ready to strike first. Each battle cost Germany more pilots than aircraft. Airframes could be replaced. Men could not. The Luftwaffe's collapse accelerates. By May 1944, American intelligence intercepted messages noting the growing chaos in German fighter command. Strategic oil facilities were under constant assault, limiting operations even further. The Luftwaffe, once a global symbol of aerial power, was reduced to short, limited sorties, inexperienced pilots, frequent operational cancellations, defensive maneuvers only. Every mission became a loss of resources Germany could not recover. Air superiority enables invasion. The sky is the first battlefield of every offensive. Control the air, control the future. With German fighters now unable to mount large-scale resistance, the Allies prepared for the greatest amphibious operation in history, D-Day. P-51 Mustangs swept over France and the Low Countries in the weeks before the landings, destroying trains and rail depots, strafing convoys, cutting German supply lines, patrolling the Channel. The Luftwaffe's failure to challenge this buildup was a clear sign of defeat. On June 6, 1944, when Allied soldiers stormed Normandy's beaches, the Luftwaffe could barely respond. Total German fighter sorties that day, fewer than 200. The skies above Europe belonged overwhelmingly to the Allies. A war that had been fought in desperation was now fought with confidence. The shift in morale. Bomb groups celebrated survival. Fighter pilots counted victories. Commanders saw strategic doors opening that once seemed sealed shut. In Berlin, the silence in the sky was louder than any roar. Hitler's vision of a fortress Reich, protected from invasion by its air force, was dying. And everyone knew it. The P-51 did not win the war alone. But it ensured the war could be won. That realization brings us to the second part of the aftermath, when consequences became outcomes, and the war's end drew near. By late 1944, the change was undeniable. The Germans were running out of fuel. They were running out of aircraft. And most importantly, they were running out of trained pilots. Many new Luftwaffe recruits had less than 20 hours of flight time before being thrown into combat. Some had never fired their guns in the air before meeting Mustangs for the first time. Meanwhile, American fighter groups rotated veterans into training roles, passing down life-saving techniques, formation discipline, a boom and zoom tactics, energy management, target prioritization. Experience multiplied. German skill evaporated. The result? The once deadly Luftwaffe became a shadow, forced to defend only the cities closest to collapse. Strategic bombing becomes decisive. With control of the sky, the Allies changed their bombing strategy from hitting factories to erasing the foundation of the German war machine. Oil refineries, transportation hubs, ball-bearing plants, power generation sites. Every destroyed rail line meant fewer tanks at the front. Every bombed refinery meant fewer Messerschmitts in the air. Germany's economy, stretched to its limit, snapped. Mustangs lead the way to victory. In early 1945, as the Allies crossed the Rhine and pushed into the heart of Germany, Mustangs became the spearpoint of the assault. They flew deeper than ever before, hunting down retreating forces, wiping out convoys, eliminating any remaining air resistance, supporting ground troops in real time. By March, P-51s roamed the skies unchallenged. Even the introduction of the Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter, came too late. Outnumbered and fuel-starved, German jets could not change the outcome. Mustang pilots intercepted them during takeoff and landing. There was no sanctuary left. A war-winning weapon. When the war ended in May 1945, the statistics told the story. White heavy checkmark, the P-51 became America's top-scoring fighter of World War II. White heavy checkmark, it achieved a kill ratio above 8-to-1 in Europe. White heavy checkmark, it escorted bombers on longest missions in history at the time. White heavy checkmark, it turned the tide of the air war permanently. General James Doolittle summarized its impact simply: it enabled us to fight the kind of war we had to fight and win. The P-51 did more than protect lives. It ensured the strategy of daylight bombing succeeded, which meant the Allies didn't just fight Germany. They strangled the Reich from above. What once seemed impossible, bombers over Berlin, uninterrupted, became routine. Legacy beyond the war. The Mustang story didn't end in 1945. It became a peacetime icon, a symbol of American innovation and relentless determination. Many were sold to allies, serving into the 1950s and beyond. Some even flew in the Korean War. Today, the P-51 remains one of the most beloved aircraft ever built. A tribute to the crews who flew them and the engineers who refused to accept good enough when lives depended on excellence. The final word. The men who climbed into B-17s and B-24s knew that statistics never told the true story. They counted hope in survival, one mission at a time. And when the silver wings of the Mustang appeared overhead, hope finally had a shape. A fighter that could not just fight, but return home with the bombers it swore to protect. The war in Europe ended with silence. No engine roar above the clouds. No tracer fire carving light into the sky. Cities once filled with factories of war stood broken and still. Yet in that silence, memories continued to fly. For the bomber crews who survived, every mission was a lifetime. They remembered the cold, the fear, the empty seats where friends once sat. And they remembered looking out the window, searching the horizon for help. Then, a silver shape would appear. A Mustang, wings glinting, engine rising like a promise. It meant they were not alone out there. History measures wars in statistics: sorties flown, bombers lost, factories destroyed. But for the men in those formations, victory was measured in something simpler: hope. The P-51 Mustang did not win the war alone. Not every bomber made it home. Not every fight ended in triumph. But in the darkest chapter of the air war, when Germany believed they still controlled the sky, the Mustang proved them wrong. Carried the air war deeper, carried strategy farther, and most importantly, carried men home. Today, restored P-51s still fly at airshows, engines thundering like they did over Berlin. People look up just as those bomber crews once did. But now the sound means peace, not survival. Each plane is a reminder that innovation can change the fate of nations, that courage can cross oceans, that sometimes heroes have wings. In the winter of 1944, a German officer reportedly stared upward as Mustangs escorted bombers across Berlin and whispered in disbelief, "The Americans, they have won the air." He was right. From that moment on, the Luftwaffe never regained the sky. And the war below could finally begin to end.